Hi, I'm Ed Bacon, the Rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, I hope that you'll find something here that speaks to you. Welcome.
Good morning and thank you for coming. We have a very important topic to discuss, addressed by a very resourceful leader. Our speaker is an author, presenter, independent scholar, specializing in American religion and culture. She has a PhD in religious studies from Duke University and is author of 8 books, including the book that brings her to us today. I want to lift those texts that we have for sale. A People's History of Christianity, the other side of the story. Many of you are familiar with what Howard Zinn, the gift that Howard Zinn gave to us by telling us the real story of American history. Diana Butler Bass has done the same thing for us in terms of Christianity. Christianity for the rest of us, how the neighborhood church is transforming the faith. And this book that brings her to us today, about which we want to learn so much. Christianity After Religion, the End of the Church and the Birth of a New Spiritual Awakening. She was born in Baltimore. She grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona. Raised a United Methodist. She became an evangelical Christian. She is now an Episcopalian. She attended Westmont College, Santa Barbara. What is so very wonderful about her is that she is a staunch, eloquent, passionate critic of conservative evangelical religion and the religious right. She has a fantastic website and presence on Facebook and Twitter. She's somebody I visit regularly on Facebook. She always says something pithy to say. That was with a TH. And I am always grateful for her unpredictable stances. I am thrilled to warmly welcome and ask you to join me in warmly welcoming Diana Butler Bass.
I love All Saints, and I'm not just saying that to get you to like me. He blew my cover. I graduated from Westmont College in 1981, and when I graduated from Westmont, I came here to Pasadena, not to go to Fuller Seminary, but instead to work at something called the U.S. Center for World Mission. And so for 1 year of my life, I lived on, is it Hill Avenue, up in Altadena, and I attended 2 churches during that time. I came to All Saints, and I went to St. Luke's in Monrovia. And I couldn't decide if I was a progressive or a Pentecostal. So I have sat in your pews and listened to your sermons, and I have been, even as a person who was just a visitor, transformed by the message. Oh, sure. Okay. By the message and the power of the gospel that you present, perform, and preach in your community, and I thank you very much for that. Now, Ed said I was unpredictable, and he also said, as I was coming up to the pulpit here, he said, "Just let it rip." And I am, but I'm going to do it softly. I wore my pearls today, so. I want to take you back to a time that some of you probably remember. I'm going to take you back to the 1970s as a way of starting the conversation about my new book, Christianity After Religion, whose birthday is today. This is actually my book's birthday. And so I'm very excited to share and actually read to you a part of the beginning of the book. As an author, authors love to read to their audiences, but since I'm an Episcopalian, a friend of mine says that Episcopalians are the people who like to read to God. So I want to start by reading to you, which seems a little bit more gentle way into a very provocative topic. This is from the very beginning, and it's called The Beginning. Saguaro High School, Scottsdale, Arizona, 1976. I opened my locker. It was overstuffed and unorganized as usual, and out fell a copy of the New American Standard Version of the Bible. The Word of God hit the sandaled feet of the girl with the locker near mine. "You're so religious," my high school companion growled. "A Bible at school? Are you becoming a Mormon or something?" "No," I replied, I'm not a Mormon. I had recently joined a non-denominational church, however, a church that took the Bible both seriously and literally. I was only vaguely acquainted with Scripture through childhood Sunday school, but my new church friends knew the Bible practically by heart. I was trying to make up for lost time by reading it at lunch. "What sort of religion makes you bring a Bible to school? Are you a religious fanatic?" I'm not religious," I stammered. I've got a relationship with God. I don't really like religion. Religion keeps us away from Jesus. It's more, I wasn't sure how to put it, of a spiritual thing. My answer did not register with her. She turned away, flipping her long Marsha Brady-like hair impertinently in my face, and walked off. It would be another decade before I would hear someone confess to being spiritual but not religious. But I was only trying to describe something that had happened to me, an experience that I had had with God. A few months earlier, I had started attending a new church, one where the pastor urged members to get born again, and I wasn't entirely sure what that meant. But I listened to friends testify to God's presence in their lives. They said Jesus was their friend, and they felt the Holy Spirit in their hearts. And although I had grown up in a Methodist church, I'd never heard anyone talk about God with such warmth or intimacy. So one Sunday during communion, as I ate saltine crackers followed by Welch's grape juice, I actually felt Jesus. He was there. He showed up again a few days later at youth group in the backyard pool party as we all sang "I Wish We'd All Been Ready," a popular song about the rapture and the end times. I heard somebody out there laugh. You sang that song. I didn't know how to explain it, but God had touched my heart, and I felt fresh and new, relieved that God was there. I figured that this was what the pastor meant by getting born again. So I told a friend, and then I asked him, "What's this religion called?" He laughed, and he said, "It isn't a religion, it's a relationship." At the time, I felt pretty special, that God had chosen me, or the small group of us, for this experience. What I didn't know was that millions and millions of other people shared this story of growing up in formal religion, finding that somehow chilly or distant or wounding, and rediscovering God through a mystical experience of connection. Many of those people would call it being born again, but others of it would say they were filled with the Holy Spirit or renewed by God. They left traditional religion in search of new communities, and they tried to reform their old churches by praying for the Spirit. They embraced all sorts of theologies, from fundamentalism to medieval Catholic mysticism, from Pentecostalism to doctrines of their own design. They got baptized or rebaptized, formed alternative communities, wrote praise songs, and raised their arms in ecstatic prayer. And it was not only Christians. Many of my Jewish friends recount similar experiences of finding God anew in those days as those who grew up in agnostics or secular families. Millions of Americans connected with their higher power and recovery groups. Religion morphed from an external set of rules into a vibrant spiritual experience of God. And somehow the word religion did not seem adequate to explain what has happened. For those of us who followed Jesus, we had stumbled unwittingly into a world of Christianity after religion, of a spiritual space beyond institutions, buildings, and organizations of a different sort of faith. With hindsight, it is a little easier to understand The 1970s were a time of profound change, a rearrangement of social relationships, a time of cultural upheaval and transformation. There were spiritual aspects to that change, as well as political and social ones. Institutions and practices that once composed what was normal in American life began a prolonged period of decline, a failure that has happened in fits and starts and continues apace even today. As the old has ended, Americans began an extended experiment in reordering faith, family, community, and nation. In 1962, only a couple years after I was born, pollsters found that 22% of Americans claimed to have had a mystical experience of God. In 1976, the year my Bible nearly broke my classmate's toe, that number had risen to 31% of the population. Then we thought we were in the middle of a revival. Apparently, it was a revival that did not stop. For by 2009, 48% of Americans confessed that they had had a mystical experience with the divine. This was not some sort of short-lived emotional outburst of renewed faith. Indeed, the numbers indicate that during the past 30 years, American faith has undergone a profound and extensive reorientation away from externalized forms of religion towards internalized spiritual experience. And that's what this book is about. It is about that shift from what people refer to as religion towards reaching for a new language that is called spirituality, a language of experience. Now, one of the things that I think is very interesting about what we have all lived through in those same 30 years is that when people talk about what happened back in the 70s, when they talk about in the media, and even historians and well-informed critics of religion do this, they identify that shift towards experience with one form of Christianity and one form only. That is, they identify that turn towards religious experience with conservative fundamentalism, conservative evangelicalism, and Pentecostal religion. What I want to do, to propose to you this morning, and also what I do in the book, is I say, yes, it is true that there has been this shift towards experience, and that is where the future of faith lies, in that terrain of figuring out how to be communities where people can connect and be transformed by an experience of God. That is the future. But that kind of spiritual experience takes many shapes. It is not the exclusive purview of conservative Christianity. Indeed, one of the points of argument here is that this shift towards experience equals sort of a third or perhaps fourth Great Awakening. And you hear folks talk about that all the time. I was just listening to Glenn Beck last week, and he was talking about the third. I do listen to Glenn Beck. Is that unpredictably weird? And he was talking about how this is a third Great Awakening. And he was claiming it for his tribe. And he was saying that anybody who disagreed with him was not part of the awakening. As a matter of fact, that they were an enemy to the awakening. Now, we might expect that kind of language from Glenn, our good brother. But what we also hear is we also see that and hear it in the media in a much more subtle way, that there's an association of spiritual liveliness with only evangelical megachurches, Pentecostal religion, or other forms of more conservative Christianity. And here I argue that while the first thing is true, while there has been a shift from externalized religion towards a spiritual experience, that it is not true. As a matter of fact, it is completely false that awakening or vibrant spiritual experience can be equated only with conservative Christianity. that there is a different shape of spiritual experience that moves past our language of conservative and liberal and takes us into an entirely different way of seeing the world. One of the things that I try to do in this narrative is to argue that the shift from the external of religion towards spiritual experience is not just in, raising one's hands in prayer or having a mystical experience around a candle or doing some sort of internal kind of work where you feel good about your own spiritual life. But that this kind of shift towards experience has radically changed the nature of the questions that that people are asking of religious institutions, churches, etc., in the world. If we think about spiritual experience, it's not just what you do, but actually it is a different kind of engagement with faith. And those questions are very simple. Back in sort of the religious world, we ask the question, what do I believe? I think that as we move towards a more experiential world of faith, the question is no longer what do I believe, but instead, how do I believe? Or how do we believe? It's a very simple shift. If you think about it for a moment, you'll realize that people are asking the how question all around you. I get asked this. I wish I had a buck for every time I've been asked the question, you seem so smart. How is it that you can be as smart as you are and be a Christian? I get asked that question. It's just amazing. In bars, on airplanes, all kinds of places. I also get asked how it is that a person who seems to be so comfortable with science and evolution and all these things can also be a churchgoer. I get asked a lot of the how question when something terrible happens. How can you believe in a good and loving God when? The questions about belief in our culture are not so much what do you Christians believe, but how can you believe it? And that's a shift towards experience. A second question that's changing in our culture is that when we talked about religious behavior, when we talked about the things that religious people do, we used to tell people how to behave. How do you do that? How are you an Episcopalian? How do Episcopalians worship? How do Presbyterians run a church meeting? How do you engage faith in the world? And so people were asking us back in those days in the old religious world for techniques or lists of behaviors or a process of activity that would make them be able to be more Christian in the world. Yesterday, I was sitting on a plane coming here. I got in the most amazing conversation. The guy sitting next to me was born in Bangladesh to an Iraqi mother and a Pakistani father who had met at Oxford and who now live here in Southern California. And the fellow, as the conversation unfolded, he revealed to me that he happened to be gay and that he was a Muslim. And so he asked me if I had ever met a gay Muslim before, and I said that no, he was my first. And so we had this amazing conversation. He is actually married to a fellow who was born in Vietnam, who was born as a Buddhist, who when his parents came to the United States, his mother converted to Catholicism, and his father became a Baptist minister. And he said, you should come to Thanksgiving at our house. Well, this fellow was incredibly well educated. He has a PhD from Caltech, and he is an engineer. And we were talking about all this stuff in this long flight from DC to LAX. And he said to me, I wanted to kiss him, but I thought it would scare him. We were talking about education, and he said, most people have not realized that the fundamental shift in education in American society has been from telling people how they were supposed to access information or how they were supposed to build things toward what? What are we supposed to do with this information? and what are we supposed to be building for the future? And the reason I wanted to kiss him is that that's chapter 6 in my book, was the shift about from how you do things towards the question of what are we going to do. And then he said, really, education now is all about a search for purpose and meaning in finding where God has called us to be in life. He also had a pretty fantastic definition of faith. He said that faith was taking risks to jump over boundaries that human beings had designed and that keep us from knowing God. So he was an amazing person. But he was talking about that second shift from how we do it to what we do. And then the third question that has shifted around us is that we used to ask the question, who am I, or who are you? And the question was supposed to be answered, I am an Episcopalian, or I am a Jew, or I am a Buddhist, or I am a Catholic, or whatever our answer was. And the question has moved from that kind of external labeling of ourselves through membership toward a question of whose. It's a little inelegant, I realize, as an interrogator, but nevertheless it works. It gets to the point. Whose am I? Who am I with? Who am I next to? How is my identity construed in a variety of relationships in my life in which I find myself? And how do I integrate those things? So my sense of identity has moved from outward proclamation towards this wondering about myself insofar as it exists in community. That, my friends, I think is what has happened. It's not just that Americans don't like to go to church anymore and that churches are narrow or whatever, not this one, but, many of them. And it's not just that the institutions are difficult to deal with or that religion is a bad word, but it's that the questions have actually changed around us. That those questions that religious institutions used to ask no longer speak to the questions that Americans are really asking. And the way in which the frame has changed is a shift from those external questions of what do I believe, how do I do it, and who am I? Give me a doctrine, hand me a book that gives me a process to follow, and then give me a label, towards these mealy questions of growing over time. And those questions are, how do I believe? How do I believe this? How do I engage this in the world? How does a living encounter with these conceptions of God make a difference in my life? What am I going to do? A question of vocation and purpose. And then finally, whose am I? Who is my life linked with that makes a difference about the fundamental nature of my identity? And how do those communities and those connections make me a richer and different person? To me, that is actually the shift away from external religion towards internal spiritual experience or experiential faith. And I think that that is the territory on which we are going to be living and moving for who knows how long, a few more generations at least. The terrain has changed under our feet, and the media does not quite see that. Instead, they choose to equate the spiritual awakening that is going on around us with only one form of faith, and that is a very externalized thing. And they have missed the fact that Americans are asking richer, deeper questions, questions of experience, questions of faith, questions that are not quite answered, questions we are on a journey to answer together. And when we think about the shift from external towards experience, from religion to spirituality, it is not just an issue of liberal versus conservative. But what I would like to suggest to you before we take questions is that when it comes to awakenings, when it comes to people experiencing these different sorts of realities, these spiritual realities, you can have evangelicals who are still what I would call religious evangelicals, people who emphasize the externals of faith, and you have experiential evangelicals, people who have grounded their life in the same set of searching questions that I just defined. You can have religious liberals, and you can have people who are liberal Christians who are in this experiential frame of mind. And you can do that with every category: Catholics, Buddhists, Jews, and as my friend yesterday on the plane told me, he said, there are plenty of Muslims in the world that would hate me. And it's not just an issue of my sexual identity, he said. It's because I understand Islam different than they do. And he said Islam is under a tremendous pressure right now to be an organized faith that tells people what to do and how to behave, or returning to the fundamental Islamic vision of a direct, unmediated life with God. And I said to him, well, that's Christianity too. We're in that fundamental conflict. So that's what my new book is about. It's about the shift away from religion towards spirituality. And it's about trying to identify and locate that shift in a strong and vigorous way in our culture so that we know what's really going on in the world around us. So thanks for this attention.
Great.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Let's get to work here. The microphones are coming to you. Please raise your hand. And here we go. You don't have to do anything. The mic, just speak, please.
I was telling you just before you began speaking about a community that I started in 1972 that was based on this kind of experience instead of just dogma and institutional. This community is going strong right now, but they feel alone. Community for Interfaith Celebration is the name of it, but they feel like they're not connected to anybody else. Is there some network that's out there that ties people together who are thinking along these same lines?
Oh, I think that's a great question. And I don't think that there's a single network that does that. I think that there are networks of people finding each other who are doing similar kinds of work. I think one of the best examples of a network like that is you hear a lot about emergent church. And basically what emergent church is the rejection of a whole sort of generational cohort of young evangelicals away from evangelicalism as institutionalized religion toward a kind of evangelicalism that is based in a whole different set of questions. And so I think that the emergent church network is largely this kind of evangelicalism. And what that meant is because it was a network and it's very interesting people, and they're asking many of the same questions that, say, folks like might be asking here, is that a lot of people who are in liberal Protestantism and Catholic circles found those folks and said, hey, we're asking those same kinds of questions too. And so they began to sort of coalesce and form friendships. And so that's one of those kinds of networks. I do think there are other sorts of political and social networks in which people are doing that kind of work. But we need more of them. And I think we also need a more vigorous public conversation about where the real American awakening is. And this, to me, is the new American awakening. I said to the guy on the plane yesterday, I said, not only do I feel like I've had an interesting conversation with someone on this plane, I said, but honest to goodness, you apparently are the future. I said, did you come here from another planet to point the way to where we're going to be? And he kind of was taken aback by that. And I said, well, I think that, this is the place where we're going to wind up. And what was really amazing about it, he has had such a passionate sense of Islamic identity. But it was not sappy in any way, but yet it completely embraced all of these other religions. And the way that he talked about faith as risk and all this sort of stuff, I was blown out of the water. I wanted to earn a second PhD just sitting around talking to that guy.
Let me me say something here,
Sure.
too.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just have a little bit of a conversation. I think that there's a lot of connective tissue that is being built right now. And people are doing it on their own, and also from religious leaders like you. But I've been interested to just Google, say, Thomas Merton, and an amazing number of websites where people come and read him every day. When you put into Google the word progressive, progressive faith, how much connective tissue comes up there. Yeah. And then there's a lot of secular stuff that's going on. I mean, the Oprah Soul Sunday thing that has been connected to us some, the Eckhart Tolle, it's just an amazing deal. Whether it takes on I think it will take on what you're talking about, but it really is a great awakening, and I think it's really.
That is exactly right. I mean, I feel kind of weird. You asked me to do something unpredictable, and what is unpredictable is that in an era of incredible decline, the first third of the book is about the great religious recession we're currently in. I look at all these awful statistics about religious life in America. But then I turn the corner and I say, well, despite that, I actually believe that there is a great awakening occurring. And I wind up calling it not a fourth great awakening. I don't think we can give numbers to it. I just call it the great global awakening of the early 21st century. And I think it's not just a North American phenomenon. I think we're in it around the world. And to be able to really identify and unpack what is happening in that awakening is key to people being able to move ahead. Because if we misidentify the awakening, if we say the awakening is over here with kind of an invigorated form of dogma that the Catholic Church is trying to do, parts of the Catholic Church are trying to do, but it's not just like Catholic versus parts of Islam, fundamentalist Islam or something. Our Presbyterian friends are having a gigantic fight right now, not about homosexuality. Well, they are having that fight, but it's really only secondary to another fight that they're having. There's a group of Presbyterians who think the way to fix their church and the way to get people to come back to being Presbyterians is to go and restore the Presbyterian Church of the 1950s. With its doctrinal clarity, with its princes of the pulpit, no offense here, its tall steeple buildings, and on and on and on. And they say that's it. When did the church last grow? It grew then, when the institution was controlled from top down by largely white men who had a clear sense of the Westminster Confession of Faith. And if we want to be Presbyterians, that's what we have to be. And there's another group of people in the Presbyterian Church who are saying, no, that's the wrong way to go. And they're leaning more towards what you are describing and what you're describing. And so this is really the rift that's in a lot of our denominations, and it's sort of unspoken because it hasn't really been defined or clearly analyzed. And that's one of the things that I really try to do here, is to give some robust sense of definition to it.
It seems to me what you've been describing is the postmodern condition. And a lot of French philosophers got there a few decades ago.
Yes.
But you mentioned the fact that what people are seeking now is a direct, unmediated experience of God.
Right.
It occurs to me that Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, and lots of others had exactly that.
Right.
Where things started to go wrong was when other people started to institutionalize their experience and their message. Could you speak to that?
Yes, there are a couple kind of cues in your question that are very interesting. One is that, French philosophers did, of course, get there first, but nobody can read them. And I, as a person who was born in 1959, have been the recipient of an amazing philosophical transformation in the West over the last 50 years in my academic work, and just kind of the way we all receive that. My editor at HarperCollins says that I am never to use the word postmodern in a book. Because it sort of has become jargon. He said, you can describe everything there is to say about postmodern culture, but I never want to see you use that word. And so I think I use it one time in 304 pages. But I do describe it. What I am describing is a sort of postmodern faith that is growing up in the wake of the ashes of the old construction of faith that was the very end of Christendom, if you want to use all that jargon. So that is part of it. Now, the second question about institutionalization, human beings always make institutions. And I don't really have any difficulty with institutions, and part of there are huge problems with unmediated experience, because it's like, well, who's to say what experience contributes to human flourishing and what experience winds up being sort of a violent delusion? And so that's a real problem in postmodern thought, and it's a real problem not just in postmodern thought, but in human society where there's a lot of misdirected power and sin and evil. So institutions, at their very best, provide, I think, pathways towards human flourishing rather than just sort of unmitigated sort of delusion. But the problem is when the institutions themselves become mired in the delusion. And then institutions have to be renewed. And this is what we are very much well past in American religious life, is that our institutions have not done, in a significant institutional way, the hard work of renewal, which means that they have to be converted. There has to be profound internal worldview transformation, spiritual change that goes on in institutions, in corporations, in political parties, where they let the past go and they move towards the future. Instead, what our institutions have done is that they have resorted to, I think, what the desperate measure of the quick fix. And the desperate measure of the quick fix is usually in the form of something like this. The Southern Baptists, I think it was 2 years ago, declared a decade of evangelism because they were losing so many members. The Southern Baptist Convention is one of the fastest declining denominations in the United States right now. And so they declare a decade of evangelism. That, whenever you see a church declare a decade of evangelism, you can pretty well guarantee that they're on their way to their death. Because what that is a quick fix. It just tells everybody, if you get out there and you bring your friends to church, friends to church Sunday, then all of a sudden everybody our institution will be fixed. Or institutional restructuring plans that are like endless. Yeah, they're the hamster wheels. And there are so many of them right now that people are just sort of sick of them. And it can be church or it can be political parties. It can be large social organizations. What is needed in the United States is for this sense of where the awakening is and the power of this awakening and the questions that are behind this awakening to inspire institutional renewal, reformation, and reformation. And when those things begin to happen, when we get, for instance, a Democratic Party that's not just this, but is this, can you imagine, what does that mean? To have a political party that is based profoundly in a set of experiential questions of connection and transformation, rather than just a political party over here that says we have to win the next election. And I think that that's actually a fight in the political parties as well as in churches. And so this is what I want. This is Diana, the old evangelical girl, showing up at All Saints on a Sunday, even though my best friends are Marcus Borg and Dom Crossan and people like that. And I'm theologically in a very different place than I was at Westmont. I am still in the place where conversion is the primary call of the church, to transform us from people who are fear-filled to people who are people of faith, willing to take the risks to go over the boundaries that human beings have created that separate us from one another and from God. And that's my new Islamic definition of faith.
Yeah, so your last observation about a different, by example, Democratic Party was actually the nature of my question, which is, is there a parallel experience, and is this language that could be useful to look at what's going on in political life in the United States between externals, what should I believe, what group do I belong to, and how should I act?
Yeah, I really do think that it is. For example, when you get to the issue of what, That's been the driving force of political parties for a long time, is that you have to believe in certain kinds of things, points of ideology, in order to be a good member of that party. Well, what if we didn't do it that way? What if the question shifted from what to how? Around the things that we're dreaming of. How do we live justly in the world? Not just, are you committed to these points of a program? I have to be short there, but I think that there is a parallel language. When I wrote this book, I actually developed those 3 questions in 3 very long chapters that are central to the book. And I think what will happen is that if people engage them from the religion angle, that the political and social questions open up very obviously. I'm going to end with a quick picture of the awakening. And that is, this is not in the book because you have to save something for when you're with your friends. People ask me all the time, where do you see this happening? One of the places I see it happening is Omaha, Nebraska. There is rising up in the cornfields in Omaha, Nebraska, a picture of the future. About 6 years ago, I was at a conference. I got asked to lead a retreat of Jewish rabbis. It was pretty fabulous. I wanted to be a Jew when I was done. And I was talking to one of the rabbis, and he told me a story about how he'd been born in Jerusalem, and that he came to the United States because he had a dream. And his dream was that in the United States, he could befriend and be a different kind of Jew. And one of the things that this hope and dream had led to is that he became friends with the imam in Omaha, who is from, I believe, Damascus, Syria. And back in the Middle East, of course, they would never be friends, but their congregations were right near each other in downtown Omaha until the Jewish congregation got so big that it had to move out of its historic downtown building and build a synagogue out in the suburbs. And so the Jewish rabbi and the imam were having lunch one day, probably not at a place that served pork, in Omaha. And the rabbi says to the imam, he says, my congregation is going to have to move, and we're very excited, but we're also very disappointed because our whole ministry was about urban social justice. And now we have to go to the suburbs, and we don't know who we are going to be. And the imam turns around and says to my friend, the rabbi, he says, it's funny enough, same thing is happening at the mosque. He said, we have so many Muslims in Omaha. Who knew there were Muslims like this in Nebraska? He said, we need a new building too. And the rabbi told me that they looked at each other and they said, what if we do it together? And so, realizing that they only had 2/3 of Abrahamic faith sitting at the table, they called the local Catholic archdiocese, and they told the Catholic Archbishop of Nebraska what they wanted to do, and they said, you want to build a church with us? The archdiocese said, are you kidding me? No. And that was when I met the rabbi, and I said, I can't really speak for these people, but why don't you try the Episcopal diocese? I said, you might find a different response there. Well, 6 years later, I was in Omaha, Nebraska, and I was being introduced at an event by a person who works for the Episcopal diocese. And before the event, I said, oh, well, you're Tim. I said, great, nice to meet you. What do you do for the diocese? Asking one of these old-fashioned religious questions about his role in the world. And he told me what he did. He was some sort of canon. And then he said, but that's not really what I'm passionate about. He says, what I'm passionate about is I've become a church planner, and I'm planting a church out in the suburbs with a mosque and a synagogue next door. Well, there it is in Omaha, Nebraska, on a piece of property in the plains. There is a mosque, a synagogue, and a church being built together, with a building that connects the 3 of them as a public space. And what the rabbi said to me is now coming to pass. He had said to me 6 years ago that he dreamed of coming to America because it was a city set upon a hill. And he caught me at this event just a few months ago, and he said, Diana, whoever knew that the hill was in the cornfields? There's a great awakening, and we're part of it.
Thank you, Diana. Diana will be available for a few minutes to sign books here if you'd like to buy. I want to connect today with the Lent event. Richard Rohr will be here to talk about the change that changes everything, experiential faith, transformative faith. You can pick up his books on the lawn today and sign up for the Lent event. Thank you very much.